It's Wednesday, June 24th, 2015, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Amanda Ralph, Head of Product at Kinetic Super, and she's going to be leading a talk on designing your products to solve for jobs to be done. Very interesting topic. But before we get started, I just want to briefly explain the format for those of you who might be joining us for the first time today. The Product Mentor Program is a program where we pair up mentors and mentees one-on-one for 6-month periods all around the world. Each of the mentors and mentees, they set their goals at the beginning and they're ongoing right now. So, folks, I'm just quickly go around and allow you guys to introduce yourselves. And also, when you do introduce yourself, just say whether you're a mentor or mentee in the current program. And we'll start with you, Ladislav.
Hi everyone, I'm Ladislav. I'm from London. I'm a group mentor, and I've been product manager for more than 7 years. And last year I was one of the mentors. That's me. Thank you.
Anthony?
Hey everyone, I'm Anthony Wynn, calling in from what looks like a heavily backlit government interrogation room. I'm one of the mentees, and I'm a product manager at Vitals, a healthcare tech company specializing in healthcare transparency. And I'm based in New York. Hi everyone.
Hi. And I hope you get released soon. And Andrew, who also seems to have brought another person with him today.
Yeah, this is Andrew and Theodore. I'm a product manager at Verizon, and I'm a mentee, and I work on their mobile apps there.
Awesome. And how old is Theodore?
He is only 4 days old.
It's never too early to start a product management career. That's all I've got to say.
He's excited to learn.
Excellent. And Amanda.
Good morning for those of you in the Southern Hemisphere and for whom it's morning, and good evening for those of you who are on the other side of the world. My name's Amanda Ralph. I am Head of Product at Kinetic Super, which is a pension plan fund in Australia, and I've been doing product management and marketing for the last 20 years and love everything product. Really looking forward to working with you all today and learning from you and hoping that you can learn some things from me as well.
Excellent. And so for those of you who are joining us, this is really what you're seeing in the room are the mentors and mentees who, some of them, a sliver of them, who are participating in the program, but we also, because it's such a long list and so hard of a program to get into, we open this up for everyone to be able to ask questions. So if you want to ask questions, you go to theproductmentor.com/live, and you have an opportunity to ask your questions there. As the questions come in, I see them on my screen, and I will then pass them along to Amanda, who will then answer them in fairly near real time for us. Just a little bit about myself. I'm Jeremy Horn, the product guy. I run a bunch of these types of things: the product mentor, product guy, the product group, etc. And I'll be moderating today. And with all that said, let me hand it over to you, Amanda, to begin your talk on designing your products for jobs to be done.
Great. Let's hope that Ladislav's trained me well to get this up. Hopefully everyone can see it. So a lot of people have spoken to me around designing products for jobs to be done, and I will talk a little bit through the framework and where the jobs to become framework has come from. But what I wanted to do today was start off with an example of how jobs to be done framework can actually help you designing your products and ensure that you're getting optimal business outcomes and customer outcomes in terms of the proposition that you're taking to market. So just imagine that you're the product manager of milkshakes today, and the execs team has called you into the boardroom, and they've asked you to develop a business case to increase milkshake sales by 15%. So as a product manager, where do you start with that? You've got to start thinking through how you're going to get that uplift, how you're going to take that to market, and what's going to drive better engagement and better sales of your product, of your milkshake. So you can focus on the product features. You might, for example, vary the size options that you have. You might offer larger sizes to upsell or smaller sizes to downsell for people that don't want to drink as much. You can add flavors to the product range, so you might only have a single flavor and you can diversify that. You can diversify your flavor set. Or you might even go down the path of adding different toppings to as a value add and extra price feature of your product. Another thing that we're really good at as product managers is focusing on the product, but going out and talking to customers or prospective customers and asking them the question, how could your product or service, in this case the milkshake, be improved? And they might give you some ideas here. They've put marshmallows in them. Think it'd be pretty sweet, but you know, you get some ideas again around the product features. The reality is when you do this, you'll get incremental improvements, but it gives you really limited certainty in terms of the business case that you're trying to build. In fact, the milkshake example is a real-life one, and it was tried and tested in market, and it delivered some uplift, but certainly not the uplift that was needed to support the business case. So why is it that focusing on product features drives an incremental increase but not a material uplift or material change? And that is, you know, it's a bit, it might seem a little bit of heresy for a product person to say that a focus on product doesn't work. But the reality is that when you're designing product and service propositions to market, if you want to drive disruptive or material change, you really need to understand what is the real life job that your product or service is solving for. And this is where the jobs to be done framework has come from. And within that, the value of the product in the context in which it's used is really, really critical. And my friend Dilbert here seems to have missed that point. So he's no doubt built a really good product with features that work, but the context in which his users are going to use his product has been totally missed. He doesn't seem too perturbed by that, though, in true Dilbert style. So one of the things we really need to understand when we're looking to redesign our propositions or take new propositions to market is how is it that people use your products and services. So in the real life example of the milkshake, the product managers started to actually observe their customers. They went in with no judgment, no preconceived notion of how this was being used. But what they discovered through their observation was that most were buying a milkshake and nothing else. So there's one interesting observation, that a large majority of people were on their way to work and that peak demand for milkshakes was actually before 8 o'clock in the morning. So that's the first sort of observation set, I guess, that they realised through that activity. In addition to that, they then interviewed their customers about the purchase, so not the product. So again, the focus has shifted from the product feature set to actually the experience of buying the product. So they would ask questions like, what were you doing when you bought the milkshake? Where were you going? What were you thinking about? What made you decide to come in and buy the milkshake, etc.? So in doing that, they were trying to establish what was the context in which that purchase of that product was being made. And what they found was a couple of things. They found that customers were buying milkshakes to A, make their commute less boring, and also to keep them from getting hungry before lunch. So there was this notion that I've had breakfast, I've got a reasonable and decent commute ahead of me. If I have a milkshake on the way, then I'm less likely to snack before lunchtime. One of the things that came through is, well, you know, you could have a croissant, you could have a bacon and egg roll. What is it about milkshakes that these people were actually valuing that caused them to buy a milkshake and nothing else? And what they found was that people preferred milkshakes or smoothies or whatever you want to call it as alternatives because they could be consumed while driving. So most cars now have a drinks holder that's within easy reach when you're driving and stopped at traffic lights. And they felt that this didn't give them the risk of staining their work clothes or spillage that some of the other breakfast alternatives would bring. So in that context of the job to be done and the job that the milkshake is fulfilling, customers didn't really care so much about flavour, size and toppings. If they were available as choices, that was good, but that wasn't the primary thing that they valued or the primary driver in their decision to buy a milkshake. So from a product management perspective, once they understood that context and the job that the purchase of the milkshake was doing, they were able to redesign the end-to-end value proposition. And this is something I talk to with my team a lot around what is the actual end-to-end value chain and value proposition that we're going to take to market, that we're going to deliver to our customers. And our customers are varied. They can be business-to-business customers who have very different needs. So, for example, in the superannuation space that I work in, the employer need is slightly different. It's around they don't want payroll hassle, they want to be compliant with the government-mandated obligations, but they're not so concerned about things like investment returns and ability to access and control the investment. Obviously, for the member for whom it's their money, that's quite a different requirement that they have. So in looking at the context and the job, it is really important to focus on that whole value chain and end-to-end proposition. So in the milkshake example, what they did was they actually then set up self-order kiosks in their outlets. And this enabled people to go and order their milkshake, get priority service, and pay using PayPass or PayWave or card. It made it easier to buy a milkshake. And this was really important for commuters who were eager to make their purchase quickly and get to work. They didn't want to be late. They didn't want to be delayed. Sales went up. And interestingly, the product itself was unchanged. So the access mechanism, the sales experience, the channel experience was different. And so the proposition or the value proposition changed, but the core product itself, the milkshake, was unchanged. One of the things that you need to be really careful, though, when you're designing your proposition and thinking about jobs to be done, is that just doing something better is not enough. You need to think about, is this easily replicated? Will it be competitively sustainable? When you focus really on the core of the end goal of your customers and the job to be done, what that generally drives is a more relevant and differentiated proposition. And it also gives you the opportunity to do something new. And if you keep that focus, it makes replication not impossible, but harder from a competitor perspective.
So Amanda, I'm going to just jump in for a moment. I've got a question from Andrew, and I'm going to toss over to him so that he can ask you.
Yeah, I was just trying to find out what the best way to get people to take the interview is, and then also in the sense that what I find is that people who want to comment either love the product or hate the product, and the core customer in the middle to some extent is hard to find. I guess for the milkshake example, you have the customers right there, it might be easier, but with more like the way the mobile software, things like that, where you're not customer to customer facing, it might be harder. I'm just wondering if you had any suggestions on that.
Yeah, so certainly in my role now and in my previous role at Medibank, I was looking after the corporate portfolio. So we essentially had 3 customer groups. The same thing. You had brokers and disintermediaries who were trying to sell your proposition on your behalf, direct to companies and direct to members. And they all have slightly different nuances and different needs. I think through my experience, what we found is a couple of things. Certainly at a B2B level, it really helps if you can have a employer panel. So that's a panel of companies that are happy to co-create with you, and they don't necessarily have to be advocates. Sometimes it's good to have companies that A, are not your clients, or B, are your clients who are unhappy. Try and get a mix and have access to senior executives and relevant stakeholders within those firms, so those that are the influencers as well as the decision makers around your product. And then we did a range of different things. We would have one-on-one interviews with key people, key C-suite executives. We would literally bring in groups of those people into our office and run them through different scenarios, again, get them talking and observe that conversation. In the panel we had at Medibank, we were very deliberate in choosing only one representative from each category, so we didn't have any competitive tension in those conversations. So we would have one mining sector, one retail sector, one telco, etc. So there's a way to do that. We had consumer panels as well, where we would get online feedback and then use that to leverage the opportunity to do face-to-face. One of the things I found really, really useful, though, is I'm not sure if you're aware of Dr. Genevieve Bell, who is the Chief Customer Insight Person at Intel, but they use ethnographic research design approach, and that's literally where you literally go into companies or into people's homes and you just observe and see how it is that you're interacting with your end product.
So like how they're using it on a day-to-day basis, not just in this like interviewing them or giving them one example.
Yeah.
That's cool.
I'd also say that I think people sometimes underestimate the value of having trained people who are really good at asking open-ended questions. So I have done things where I've either trained up my team or I've actually invested in taking people in who are very good and not necessarily so connected to my product or my business, so they're not as emotionally invested. Because that's one of the other dangers as a product manager. You live, eat, and breathe this thing, you know, so close that sometimes your impartiality becomes a little bit cloudy. So having someone who's not so close to it, who's actually trained and skilled in asking open-ended questions, is a really good thing, because they go in totally non-judgmental and unbiased in their perspective.
Ladislav?
Hi, Amanda. My question is, once you receive a goal from business to increase certain targets, how do you decide what's the best approach? How do you know that you should focus on the product or the service around? How do you know upfront?
Yeah, it's a good question, Ladislav, and it can be really difficult. I guess it's going through that jobs to be done framework and understanding, is the problem, is the unmet need, if you like, from a product or service perspective, or is it something in the experience or process that is not meeting the need? So I'm just trying to think of a relevant example. We developed a corporate private health insurance product, which was a really, really strong product and met the needs, if you like, or the jobs to be done of the end user and also the provider. But in our analysis and in our business casing and design process, what we discovered was that the payroll administrators hated administering these products because they had to split payments and they had to, it was a very, very ugly process. And that was really the key inhibitor to them actually deciding to go with us as a business and you know, contract with us. So in that particular instance, the focus then became not so much on changing the product per se, but actually delivering a solution that would fix that particular problem for that particular group of our customer base, which was our payroll HR influencers. And so we outsourced it to a third party who can run that stuff. It's their bread and butter. And that took away the problem, and it was amazing that on the back of that, the engagement we then got in market significantly improved. I think the other thing is you need to be, you know, as a product manager, you often get pressure from execs when, particularly end of financial year. I mean, in Australia right now we're heading into 30 June and it's the topic of, you know, the day is we've got to, you know, run home. How do we hit our targets? How do we make sure that by the 30th of June, you know, the P&L is looking the way we want it to look? And as a product manager, you do have an obligation and a role to kind of be the voice of reason and talk to where the real value opportunity is, both from the company that you work for but also from the consumer, because otherwise it's going to be unsustainable and you might get a quick uplift but it won't actually deliver what you want it to.
Awesome. So that's all the questions we have right now. Amanda, feel free to continue with the presentation.
One of the things you also need to think about is, in terms of what is the job to be done, how do you design for behavioural change and need? So what is it that people are trying to do, and we've got to try and understand how it is that they understand the world. So not only just what are they trying to do, but in terms of trying to do things, what's their perspective? What's their view of how they would go about that, how they would access that? And to the question from Andrew around, getting the right insight and asking the right questions, it's where you need to put a lot of time and effort and be quite deliberate, because people often say things and claim things, and claim that they would do things and claim that they would change and behave in a certain way, but the reality of that is often different. I mean, the classic one is, from a product perspective, pricing in terms of what people say they're willing to pay and what they're then actually willing to pay at the end of the day. So be careful, when you're taking that observation and getting that insight, be really careful about the distinction between what people claim and what people will actually do. I don't know if you've heard of the saying of pave the cow paths. There are some city planners that actually, in terms of designing and paving out community spaces, wait to see where the traffic actually walks, and then they pave post that, so they get the groove in the path, and then go, okay, this is the direct path that people want to take. This is the actual way that they're behaving, and will then pave to that where they can. So, the actual design and the actual user experience can sometimes be quite two distinct things.
We had another question that just came in, Amanda.
Yep.
Ayush, and I'm going to throw it over to him to ask this question. And just for those of you who are also just joining us, feel free to submit your questions. Anyone can submit your questions, and I'll pass them on to Amanda. You go to theproductmentor.com/live and submit your questions on that page, and I will make sure we ask them. Ayush?
Hi, Amanda. So I work for an enterprise product, and I wanted to know, I've been using my customers, some of my contacts, more than twice, and I wanted to know how much is okay. I cycle kind of through about 10 of them. I don't have access to hundreds, so how do I balance that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess it can vary, but one of the things I think you need to be really careful around is people get very fatigued around that if they can't actually see any incremental change or value. So if you're going and having those conversations and then there's nothing as an outcome on the back of that, then they kind of start to question, well, what's the purpose of this? What's the value to me? And so I'm quite dogmatic about, even where the insight comes back to say that there is no change needed, that I close the loop and go back to those people that I have engaged for that insight to actually tell them that that's the insight and that's the decision. So at least they feel like, understandably, that there's been some value and there's been some purpose behind that engagement. You do need to be careful about driving fatigue. I think sometimes also it can be, if you feel that that's a potential danger, I guess the other thing is to ask them for referrals to other people that they think might have a perspective or might be able to give insight and feedback. So, we really value and we really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate and co-create with you, but understand that you're a very busy person, that you've got a lot of things that are demanding time from you. Is there anyone else that you would recommend that might be able to give us a perspective that would help us deliver you as our customer something better and something that you're going to value?
Okay, that's a good point. Just a clarification: when you close the loop, do you tell them the exact reason, or you just say, this is the conclusion?
It depends, I guess. It depends on the level of trust and relationship that you have with that particular client or customer. I've got clients that I can have, well, I'm still establishing them in my new job, but in previous roles I've had clients that I can have very honest and open discussions with because I know that that's a trusted relationship, and others where probably they're not as well established, so I'm not necessarily going to share or be as I'll share with them what they need to know, essentially.
Okay.
I think you have to make a judgment call.
Thank you.
That's all the questions we have right now. So Amanda, feel free to continue.
Okay, great. I wanted to talk through a real life example, which was Medibank, which is my former employer, has a direct brand or a sub-brand called AHM. So it's AHM by Medibank, and it's targeting quite a different segment of the market for private health insurance. But in Australia, we're quite heavily regulated in terms of what we can deliver from a private health insurance perspective, in terms of the services and how they can be accessed. But one of the areas that is a little bit more flexible is what we call here extras. So they're all your things like optical, dental, remedial massage, physiotherapy, etc. And not surprisingly, when you ask people what they would like to access in terms of those extra services, people will always say, oh, they want everything and they want lots of choice. And sorry, I just got a technical. There we go. But in reality, most people only consistently use the same core services. So the ones that they really value. So we did some data analysis to see what was the utilisation, and then we actually went out to members and tried to understand what was it that they were really valuing in those extras services. Was it choice, or was it some certainty around the fact that when they needed the services that they wanted, they would have coverage and they would have benefit limits that would allow them to access those for a reasonable cost. The way that private health insurance is structured in Australia is, from an extras perspective, is most funds will give you, let's say, for example, $1,000 a year of extras cover, and then within that they do what they call sub-limits. So they'll say you've got $1,000, but within that you can only use $200 for optical, and you can only use $300 for physiotherapy or $400 for dental. So somebody that wants to use $400 for physiotherapy, for example, can't do that. They get capped out. So we did a lot of work with both providers, so with allied health professionals who were delivering those services. We went and watched how people accessed and how they went through the decision-making process around accessing those providers. And what we found was that what they really wanted to do was have a single limit where they could utilise the services that mattered to them, which were generally sort of 2 or 3. So people would say, I want podiatry, I want massage, I want everything, but at the end of the day they might really only value highly the physiotherapy and the dental. So we introduced something to market that at the time was quite disruptive and well, still is quite disruptive, which is a single limit extras product. And the way that works is people can take out their health insurance, their hospital coverage, and in their extras they get the $1,000, but they can use it any way that they see fit. So if they want to use $1,000 of physiotherapy, they can. If they want to use $800 for physio and $200 for dental, they can. And it really resonated with the target segment of the market that the AHM brand appeals to. And AHM by Medibank is now the fastest growing private health insurance fund in Australia. And it's been, I mean, there was a lot of things that led to the ability to take that to market in terms of the scale and agility of AHM, but it's been something that other providers have found quite difficult to replicate in market. So it's definitely given AHM a competitive advantage. So again, if we'd focused purely on what customers were saying, which was they wanted a wide array of extras to be covered, then we would have probably built something and delivered something that was fairly vanilla and fairly similar to other products in market.
Got another question. This one is from Anthony. I'm going to throw it over to you, Anthony.
So this is actually a great case study because I'm in similar space. And so I guess my question is, let's say that you're a B2B2C product, or in other words, your customer is the enterprise, but the end user is the consumer. Especially in like the case that you presented, where there's a radical conclusion coming out of the jobs to be done framework. How do you sell the conclusion or proposition based on those jobs to be done when the client is using this? Like the client has their surveys and evidence. The user wants 50 new toppings on their milkshake, or the kind of traditional healthcare framework that you have instead of this radical new approach. How does that conversation with the client go?
Sorry, I just got some feedback there, so I just got the end of the question. So is your question, Anthony, that how do you manage customer level sort of requirements that differ?
Yeah, exactly. So that, if the jobs to be done framework is something that's kind of a new framework for understanding how to derive the real product value, and your client is operating on an older framework where they're polling customers on their preferences and reaching the conclusion that we need 50 new toppings on our milkshake rather than a new way of delivering milkshakes.
Yeah. So it's a real challenge. And I guess the answer is not easy, but I think if you bring those clients into the design process and co-create with them, and also get them access to the end user, it can go a long way in terms of bringing them along the path to understanding why it is that there's a better, more optimal business outcome for them as well, and a better experience for their end users than a more sort of traditional B2B type conversation. It can be really difficult. I mean, there are times where you have to essentially make the call as to whether or not the client is important enough for you in terms of your addressable market and your business pipeline that it's worth that investment, or whether you just kind of go, well, this particular proposition then is perhaps not for you, and we'll continue to service you in a way we have, but we'll start to develop this new proposition in this other part of the market. I mean, sometimes you have to make those trade-off calls. Obviously, if it's a really, really critical client and you really believe that there's opportunity, then you have to sell the story. And the story, really needs to be on the lens of what's in it for me and what's in it for them. So if you feel that it's going to deliver their end users a better experience, and that's likely to give greater loyalty, retention, upsell opportunity, etc., across that whole value chain, then that's the story that you should tell them. I think my other observation would be that this is where prototyping can become really useful, because it gives you the opportunity to perhaps test with a client or part of the market that's more receptive, and then you've got some evidence and a fact base that you can then take into the sort of detractors, or those that are a little bit reticent to come along in that journey with you, and you can say, well, actually we've got some real life evidence here. This is what we're seeing, and this is how we're seeing that value translate, and that is always highly valuable in those conversations.
And that's all the questions we have right now. Again, if other people have questions from the rest of the internet there, those of you joining us either from YouTube or joining us from our live page, you can always post your questions to our Q&A section, and I'll pass them along to Amanda. and that's at theproductmentor.com/live. And with that said, Amanda, I'm going to throw it back to you.
Great, Jeremy. So just to recap, in terms of the jobs to be done framework, I mentioned at the start of this discussion that some of you may have heard of the jobs to be framework before. Really, there's two sort of key people that started this notion of focusing not on the product feature set, but really focusing on the jobs to be done and what's the outcome that customers are seeking. Anthony Ulrich, who's the founder of Stratagen, he is very focused on outcomes that customers are seeking, and Clayton Christensen has built on this. You may have read his book, The Innovator's Dilemma, which talks about disruptive innovation and how using the jobs to be done framework can actually position you to disrupt the market. If you haven't read them, suggest that you put them on your reading list because there's some very good reads. And Anthony also has, well, both of them actually are quite active on Twitter and have blogs and things, and have some really great discussions and applications of using the jobs to be done framework. The framework is quite simple in terms of deconstructing and how do you actually find and hone in on what it is that the job to be done is. And they use this when I want so I can approach. So if we go back to the milkshake example, in the first instance, the job to be done was that when I'm commuting to work in the morning by car, I want to have something for breakfast that will stave off my hunger until lunch so I can focus at work without being hungry and distracted. And you can see there that our little customer's not very happy. He's looking a little bit distracted. I think he probably hasn't had quite enough to eat. But again, it's quite different focus in terms of what you need to deliver in your product and how you get that product to your customers than just purely focusing on the option set that we started with, which was the flavour, size and toppings. The second job to be done was when I'm commuting to work in the morning by car, I want to have something for breakfast that I can consume without spilling on my work clothes, so that I can drive without being distracted and make it to work looking clean and presentable. So when we frame up these jobs to be done, I think one of the things I would call out is it looks simple on the page, but it often takes a couple of goes to really hone in on what is the job. And the more input you can have into that process across your teams and across your business, I think you'll get a much more focused and valuable job to be done insight. They're not easy. You know, less is more is often much more difficult. It's often more difficult to say things in fewer words than it is to say things in a lot of words. But this framework, what it does is it makes you really focus on what is the problem that you're trying to solve for, what is it that your customers value, and then what is it that you can deliver to actually solve for that problem. As I said, the jobs to be done are not necessarily easy to uncover and identify. So you need to really listen and listen to the stories they tell. It's often in the weaving of those stories that you get the aha moment in terms of the insight. Use open-ended questioning techniques. So don't lead the witness. And as I mentioned earlier, that's where I think some companies and teams underinvest in terms of getting expertise in that process from people who are very good at actually teasing out the experience and teasing out the insight from the people that they're talking with. Look at the context, look at the customer motivation, and observe in real-life situations. So I mentioned Dr. Genevieve Bell and her ethnographic research approach. Often you find that people are using your products and services in ways that you had never really imagined that they would use them. I think there's the great example of Lego and their whole sort of adult Lego, or that market which is worth billions of dollars to them. They hadn't really ever considered that Lego was anything other than a toy, and it was through some of that observation and insight gathering that they suddenly realized there was a whole new addressable market for them that is now one of their biggest revenue streams. Empathise with your customers. It sounds cliche, but it is a truism to walk in your customer's shoes. And one of the things that I do and have always done as a product manager, and my teams do, is I'm very disciplined about making sure that we get out into the market and into frontline with our customers on a regular basis. So that can be half a day in the call centre, going out with the sales team and shadowing them when they go on B2B client visits, working with them on market tenders, going and seeing how people are actually using and engaging with the products. So in the case of private health insurance, I used to go out to the hospitals and actually see how that product then iterated at the time of need when our members were needing to use their health insurance. You get so much insight, so much richer set of insight and observation that if you have a good data set, you know, you need to have data and you need to be able to look at your data as well. But the two together are a really powerful combination and force in trying to uncover the jobs to be done. The other thing I would say is don't switch to solution mode too quickly. It's something I've had to learn to become better at. I still struggle with it at times. My mind goes very quickly into, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we could solve that problem this way. You need to step back a little bit and not make that judgment too quickly. Really take the time to understand what it is that is the problem, and also importantly, how the customer understands that problem. So what's their perspective of that problem? Once you've done that, you then need to validate both the jobs to be done and the solution. And your work as a product manager really has only just begun. So you might have identified the problem, but will your customers care about it? If you've got a solution, do they need it? Does it really solve their problem? Will they actually understand how it solves their problems? You can have the best solution, but if people don't actually understand how that solves for the problem that they have, then your product's not going to go anywhere. What are the alternatives that they currently have? And from a commercial perspective, will they be willing to pay for it? So is it something that you can actually commercialize and operationalize? And once you've done that, then you have to start moving into the design phase. Some of the design process and principles that I follow in terms of designing propositions is, you know, the job to be done one, solve for the customer problem and be customer-led is very important. Once I've done that, it is looking at how can we learn fast and fail fast, if the case may be. And some products and some services lend themselves better to different types of testing. It might be, if you've got digital's great, if you've got a really strong digital proposition, then A/B testing is something you can do quite nimbly and at quite low cost. Your minimum viable product, and then just iterate it, and iterate it. And I think we get a little bit enamored with technology. Don't overlook things like we've got some great insights in the past in our design process by even just doing mock-up posters and putting them around the office, and then asking people to put stickers on the things that resonate with them, whether it be a problem, whether it be a feature set, whether it be a price point. All those things, we get people to actually, in the business, come in and vote. And again, where I've got really fantastic insight has often been from our frontline staff, so those in the call centre, those in the retail stores, the salespeople who are dealing with the customers day to day. It's a great filter, if you like, before you invest too much capital and time to take something actually to market. You can get a lot of upfront learnings quickly that will save you a lot of pain and a lot of cost downstream. It sounds obvious, but you know, your proposition needs to be easy to understand. It needs to be easy to buy and easy to sell, and it should be unique, obvious, and compelling across your sales teams, across your consumer base, and your servicing teams as well. Continuous improvement and evolution. So the job to be done is not static. it changes and it evolves, and as it changes, your proposition so needs to change and improve as well. So don't sort of just think that because you've put this out there and it's doing well, that's it. I mean, I think Apple's iPhone is a great example of that. You know, they found a job to be done that nobody else had really met as an unmet need in the market, but they haven't sat back and just said, oh, we're done now and it's a great proposition. They continually evolve it. They continually look at what is the landscape of their user base and how can they meet those new and emerging needs.
So we have a question just came in from Andrew, and I'll hand it over to you, Andrew.
Yeah, I was wondering, so in my position, it's a large company, so we have tons and tons of data, not necessarily the kind of in-depth, questions related to job to be done, but in a sense, sometimes it's hard to, manage it all and, get the right data out of the information to really act upon it. So I'm wondering, for jobs to be done and all the data and insights you're getting, is there some kind of tool or software you use to help you manage it better?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. I certainly like using value driver trees, which I've put an example in the back of my pack for people that are not so familiar with them. I find what that does is it starts to shape up for me from a business perspective, and you can cut your value driver tree across multiple dimensions. So it might be a purely financial value driver in terms of the return to your business. It might be a customer value driver tree, so what is it that's going to drive optimum value to the customer, and then overlaying them, you can very quickly sort of find the areas, I guess, of the business and the market that are going to drive optimal and scalable opportunity, because you can waste a lot of time trying to define and solve for problems that are on the margins. So it's really the challenge you have is trying to find what is the thing that is really the sweet spot for you as a business and sweet spot for you for your customers in terms of those problems. You can get data paralysis. You can analyze and analyze and analyze, and the incremental gain can be marginal. So I think a couple of things. I mean, product management, I really love the design component, and that part of it's really exciting, but at the end of the day, as a product and portfolio manager, you also really need to know the fundamental mechanics, if you like, of your business. You need to understand the P&L. You need to know what's going to drive sustainable value and return for your business, and then look at it as to how you then drive that from a market perspective to deliver customer value that's going to then in turn give you business value. I'm just trying to think of a real example maybe that I can illustrate. It's not springing to mind quickly. If I think of something, I'll shoot you a note. But yeah, I'd be wary of data overload. And again, the value driver tree and the mind mapping is another thing I do to try and get clarity around what is the area that I need some evidence to support my business case.
Cool, thanks.
We just had a question came in from Ian, so I'll do my best to kind of capture the question to you, Amanda. It's a two-parter, so bear with me. It starts. This is from Ian. I'm a product manager at a dev firm. My client, with no users, likes to act quickly, design in a vacuum, and is paranoid about people stealing his idea. I'm building a product that at this point will never have users. How can I convince my client to slow down and truly understand what he's building and why?
Tricky question. I'd have to probably think that one through a bit more, but again, I guess it's in part, what actually is his motivator, what is his driver in terms of, what makes him get out of bed every morning and start the day, and that's always a good starting place. The other thing I probably didn't say is I'm also a big fan of, well, Melbourne's got an amazing coffee culture, so we're all a bit coffee obsessed, but, try and sometimes move out of the meeting room. Go for a walking meeting, take your client for coffee, and get them in a setting where kind of, you know, their guard can come down a little bit and have a really honest conversation. But try and understand what it is that's motivating him. Is it the thrill of the hunt, so to speak? Is it financial? Is it a combination of things? Once you get that trust, it then probably is going to be, it's not going to be easy, but you'll have more opportunity to try and start taking him down a path that allows you that space to actually slow down a bit and put more thinking and deliberate thinking into the design of the proposition. But it can be challenging.
Awesome, awesome. That's all the questions we have right now. Again, everyone, keep them coming in. theproductmentor.com/live. And with that said, back to you, Amanda.
So this is just a framework, again, I use for design process and principles. So your discovery and analysis is kind of that phase where you're really just trying to understand what is the problem, is there an addressable market, do you have what's needed to actually address and solve for that problem. And then once you've kind of worked through that, you can then start to initiate and diagnose the opportunity in much more detail. And then go into your test and learn phase where you can prototype, you can use minimum viable product, and just keep learning, keep then making decisions on the back of that learning and putting those insights back into the proposition and or the diagnosis if you so need. Different organisations have different structures as to how they manage their product pipeline, how they manage the design process. But certainly the need for product managers and design managers to work collaboratively is really critical. You must kind of be one and the same team as you're going through those processes to drive engagement and planning. You need to have, you know, the design process can be a little bit nebulous and can be exciting at the same time because it's where a lot of the creativity comes in. But you should also have a really clear understanding of what are the outputs and process at each stage of that design and what does success look like. So what's going to be the thing that says, okay, I'm now ready to move into the next phase. So you do need to have some discipline in terms of how you approach it. That being said, the process itself also needs to be flexible enough and adaptable enough so that you can actually facilitate that learning and that iteration based on the insights that you get. So, you know, at Medibank, they have recently transitioned to a full activity-based working capability in a new building, a fantastic facility, and it's really optimal in terms of things like co-location, collaboration, and you need to think a bit about how you're actually going to work with your team of people, including your customers. And look, where I'm at now, it's a smaller organisation, so it's not as customised in terms of that process, but there are things that you can actively do to engineer, if you like, those opportunities for collaboration and getting deeper understanding and insight. So some tools that I do find helpful. Mind maps, I think, are great for capturing those observations, the story threads that you get when you're out there, co-creating with customers, talking to frontline in the business, and as you go through the discovery and analysis phase. I use an application called MindJet to do this. There's plenty of things in market. The MindJet for me is great because it's quite intuitive and really easy to connect and bring your ideas together. You may be familiar with Shardul Mehta's product canvas. He's the Street Smart product manager. I really love this tool. I've actually integrated some of the jobs to be done language and terminology in the product canvas that I use, but it's great for identifying in a single page your product strategy and the elements of the proposition that you need to deliver to solve for the job to be done. And to one of the earlier questions around stakeholder engagement, particularly you know, it depends. Every organization, every customer is different, but I do find that this product canvas is a great tool for engaging parts of the business that perhaps are not as well connected to the design process or as well connected to you know, the role of product. This is something you can take into a meeting, have, you know, pre-engaged them with, that starts to talk through what are the key success factors, what are the key drivers that's going to make this product proposition, you know, a good idea and give a good return to the company. And it also forces me to be more disciplined in actually capturing those things, capturing the stakeholders and resources that I'll need to plan against, capturing my business value and cost structures, which are, you know, sometimes they're the things that tend to fall by the wayside. So this is, for me, this keeps me on the straight and narrow. As I said, value driver trees I think are really useful to focus on the core drivers of value across the different dimensions of the business. This is just one example, but I often will cut a value driver tree from from different perspectives, from a channel perspective, from a customer perspective, from a finance perspective. They give me really great areas to focus on and bring as the core of my then central business case. And they also give me greater clarity around what does success look like. So in 6 months' time, if I'm going back to the board to report to them on the progress of the initiative, these are the things that I then have as anchors to tell that story. So that's pretty much it from me in terms of jobs to be done. I'm sure there might be some more questions, but I've also included my contacts there. I really would welcome anyone reaching out and connecting with me via email or phone or Skype, LinkedIn and Twitter. I'm quite an avid, a little bit eclectic Twitter user, but please feel free to reach out and keep the conversation going.
Outstanding, outstanding. Thank you very much, Amanda. And also, as always, everyone, the presentation that you just saw will be shared on our SlideShare channel, so you always can pick it up and read it some more in some more detail later. And again, thank you, Amanda, Head of Product at Kinetic Super, for today's discussion on designing your products for jobs to be done. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Bourne, the product guy, and everyone else who joined us today, and the product mentor. And also, don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor, and our next session is scheduled to start November 1st, that'd be session 4. Like today's speaker, we're definitely looking for new people, so go to theproductmentor.com and sign up today. And also, if you're looking to fill a product job or you're looking for great product people, we have a free resource that we make available to everyone and dedicated exclusively to product jobs. And there you can go to theproductjobs.com. And with all that said, thanks everyone, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.